Hey, it's Drybear. The Throne and Liberty beta has been up for over a day now, and I've been playing and grinding it, so I wanted to give a first impressions video for the game. Now, typically when it comes to MMOs, I like to put in at least a couple hundred hours before I do a full review of the game, which is why this is going to be more of a first impressions, talking about the class system, the weapon system, the world questing, dungeons. We've done some dungeons now, some of the open world events, the size of the world, and how I think the MMO is going to serve us overall. I think graphically, the game looks awesome. It runs really well, and also you can see right now we happen to have one of the world events going on where this sky whale flies over the sky and blesses us. He gives us bonuses which you can trigger with equipment and stuff like that, and he also will periodically drop items you can collect to turn in for events and stuff like that. But he's also quite majestic. If you catch him in the night, he'll glow like bioluminescent glow all over the sky and have glowing, and he kind of covers the whole map. You can see him on the map here. He'll just sky whale around, which is pretty unique. Now, when it comes to world, you're gonna get basically the usual stuff you have for this, and I think that this is, at least aesthetically, kind of more of a vanilla MMO. All characters that you create are humanoid, either humanoid masculine or humanoid feminine. There are no creature races. You can't be a stone golem or a dragon person or a goblin or that kind of variety there, which is pretty typical of games that come out of Korea. In general, you get a little bit more modern fashion focus, like more relatable humanoid or humanistic aspects to the characters. And at least for me, this game kind of scratches a similar itch that BDO does for me, but in a more traditional sense. This feels like a more well-rounded traditional MMO, whereas BDO is more of like an action, almost fighting game kind of MMO with combos and moving around at high speeds, whereas this is going to be more tab targeting, using skills, and using combos. They do have some nice quick time event triggers, like right here you can see the purple rings coming in on the enemy. There's actually a perfect parry. These are called Fury attacks, and all bosses and enemies have them, and which parry you use is related to the weapon you have in hand and what you have equipped. As far as stability and performance, I would say it's definitely above average. The game has improved dramatically since its closed testing phase, and it's at the point where I can say I can recommend it for people that are interested in MMO games, and I think it's got enough there that if they, manage to pull off the end game, which we would want to test a lot more before we comment too much on, but just focus on the fact that the baseline is there. The combat feels different. At first, the combat feels really weird, and we'll get into that in a second when we talk about the skills and the weapons and creating your own class and how that kind of goes into the process of playing and creating your own gameplay, which can have positives and negatives associated with it. But I would say that the visual effects look nice, it functions well, it plays well overall, and once you get used to the oddities of Throne and Liberty, it's definitely a great entry in the MMO genre. But let's dive into the class system from Throne and Liberty. It's not entirely new, you've seen it in many places before, but they do some original things that you'll want to have to understand how it works. So there aren't a traditional archetype class setup in Throne and Liberty. You're not going to be able to pick priest or dragon knight or warrior or whatever. You're going to create your own class. So it's very similar to games like New World, where you have a set of weapons that you choose. Those weapons have stats and different characteristics that are associated with them, and they also come with their own list of abilities. Then when you equip a weapon, you can also equip an offhand, so you'll be able to swap between two weapons during your gameplay, and you can do this while you're moving around as well. You can press tilde on PC, which allows you to switch between your two chosen weapons, and between that, you'll be able to get different stats for it. The stat system is very simple. You have four main stats: strength, dexterity, wisdom, and perception. Perception gives you chance to hit. It gives you CC increase. Wisdom gives you mana. Dexterity gives you crit and evasion. Strength gives you HP. And you can mix and match those. And kind of like New World, it does have breakpoints as well, as you put more and more points into those specific stats or raise their stat level through the gear that you put on, you'll be able to get bonus effects. So for wisdom, for example, you get max mana or cooldown speed. For strength, as you get higher and higher, you get damage reduction for a tank roll, that sort of thing. Aside from weapons, you have your basic gear setup. You have 6 equipment slots for your main gear. You have 5 jewelry slots for accessories that get different benefits, and you'll be upgrading those through different sets. But the primary setup for your class is going to be your 2 weapons and also the customization of the skills in-game as well. So this is where you make your own class, and It's a lot more flexible than I would say many of the weapon-specific class creation systems that I've encountered. This might actually be the best one that I've played with so far. So if you look on the screen here, you see that I have a wand and a staff equipped. Of those, we have 10 different ability slots that we can have equipped, and each weapon has an option of 9 each. So you can specify more into one weapon. You can specify maybe 50-50 if you wanted, or some kind of blend between the two, and what you choose allows you to create your own class. So you might be able to do lightning damage, burning damage, frost damage, and fire damage, but you'll notice that they have global status effects on these, or global titles. So for example, a dot effect is called a weaken, as well as a curse effect, as well as a poison effect. So since they're all called weakens, there are things that you can get with different classes that improve weakens or allow you to control or consume weakens to make big explosions happen, which is really cool. So you can make builds that way. So you can maybe go more staff than wand, and you can choose between those. Then on the right side of the screen, you have your passives. There's 7 passives per weapon, and you can have a total of 8. So again, 1 less per weapon that you would get. So you can specify all crossbow or all greatsword -1, and then just get 1 filler slot. Or you can find a mix between the two that makes sense for your character. But you can see how this can get interesting, right? Because we can start mix and matching different things. So for example, if we mix the greatsword, which has a lot of burst damage, but also a lot of self-sustain, they have like rallying cries and battle shouts that can help them sustain. They also have taunts that they can use, and so does the shield effect. So you can actually combine together the pull from the sword and shield with the big AoE slam or the big spin coming out of the greatsword. You can run with the like the crossbow and the bow, which has some great synergy as well. And you can even have benefits between these on passives. There's a passive on these that make it so that when you're using longbow or crossbow, you get a chance to shoot additional projectiles. But because you can specify how many of each, it's not a fixed amount that you can use. You can use 9 longbow skills if you want, which gives you more focus on that, and then 1 extra skill, which means your offhand weapon would matter a little bit less when you're trying to combine them together. Next, you'll be able to increase the mastery experience of these weapons by using them or consuming consumables that grant mastery XP, and you'll be able to specify even further how you want to use that weapon, which again reinforces this idea that you can create your own playstyle, right? So even within the crossbow here, we can go to the regen tree, the move tree, or the chain fire tree, right? Giving us more additional damage. We focus on DPS. If we're using the crossbow as an offhand on a healing spec, so maybe we're using wand as our main source of healing as a support character, but rather than like staff or longbow, which have utility effects, maybe we run the crossbow as our offhand instead, and we focus on going down the regen set. So we actually get more mana regen or health regen or defense to make ourselves a little bit tankier, and we kind of combine all that together. We even get mana cost efficiency. So you have this like layering system of which 2 weapons you choose to make your class, which of those, 18 abilities that you have available do you slot into your 10 slots, and which of those 14 passives do you slot into your 8 passive slots. Combine all of that together and then start specifying your mastery for the weapons as well, and you can really create some unique playstyles. Like you can be a primary damage dealer that has on like daggers. This has become very handy in dungeons. There is an ability called Phantom Smokescreen that makes all party members dodge damage for 3 seconds. You can run dagger as an offhand for a healer spec, or maybe even as a tank spec, right? You can run like sword and board or great sword as a tank, and then you can run daggers as an offhand and run that smokescreen so that when you see a big boss mechanic coming in, you can pop the smoke screen, people avoid the damage, and then you go back to your greatsword or your sword and board and start dealing damage that way. There's also evasion. It's possible you could be an evasion tank versus a upfront damage or block tank, that sort of thing. And then damage gets even more complicated as well, and how you mix and match those matters, and then how you specify the mastery tree makes a difference as well. Now, I'm not going to talk about equipment skills, guardian skills, and transcendent skills. Transcendent skills, to me, I'm a little wishy-washy on, because these are things that are granted to people that score or rank highly in activities. So if you do really well in some activities, you can unlock these transcendent skills and use them. I don't know how much of an impact this is going to be. I'm sure they're going to be really good for like group-wide sieges or world bosses where there's a lot of people going on, but I'm not sure how that's going to affect your overall gameplay, because generally they have long cooldowns. Equipment skills are going to be available, as far as I know, to all players, all specs, all everything, which means you'll be able to create some really unique things, but without knowing the extent that they go through, I'll leave that on just for a first impressions video. Now, in general, I'm usually not very excited about these kind of systems existing in MMOs. I think think it creates a lot of freedom, but in many cases it can also cause some damage for the MMO as well, as some people end up getting too caught in choice paralysis, where they're not sure what to mix with what or why, and a lot of the changes can feel really small or minuscule, or there can be some expectations. Watching New World, which kind of pioneered this a little bit, at least from a mainstream standpoint, they're not the first game to ever do this kind of swapping system, but at least from an MMO standpoint, they were one of the biggest. And so watching that grow over time, where people learned to use the life staff or the musket or the sword and board or the void gauntlet with different combos, and people kind of, even though they wanted to create this system where people could be perfectly free, eventually metas were established. People figured out what combos were best, what was the right order of stats, what was the right combination of abilities. And I think that the New World system being more rigid than this will be a nice study case on whether or not this system can thrive. Because again, you could be a primary crossbow user, mostly crossbow passives, mostly crossbow abilities, with one or two variants from other abilities that are other weapons you don't use too much, or you could have a mixture. So there's going to be a lot more expression, I think, in Throne and Liberty for creating your class and creating your experience that might be pretty unique and fun. Now, let's take a minute to address the monetization and progression in the game, because there's still a question on how far they're going to go. They started out with a very aggressive scheme in the early stages of the game, and we're not sure how much of this is going to change based on Amazon AGS publishing the game. They did make changes to Lost Ark when they published that. They were planning to make changes to Blue Protocol, and might still if it still launches, and we might see some changes for the monetization and scheme for this game as well. As it stands right now in the open beta, it's not as aggressive as we thought. There is a battle pass. You can get a premium battle pass that does give you some progression in game. So you'll be able to unlock this to get special costumes, and there's also a leveling log. So if we go to our leveling log here, you can see that this is just a kind of like a leveling set of challenges to complete to get bonuses, but you can also buy a leveling log pass, which if you buy this for currency, you will actually get growth stones, special materials, base materials, improvement book selection chests, and training book selection chests. So this allows you to raise the level of your gear, add traits to your gear, raise up your mastery experience, craft better gear. So this leveling pass, which does have a price associated with it, is going to be something that does give you progress and power in game. And the battle pass is that way as well. There's a premium battle pass that will give you a morph for the character as well as the skins, and will give you some progression materials as well. This magic powder can be crafted into equipment. You can level it up as well. We can even get some of these here. You get some of the baseline on the free level, but it's mostly in-game materials that can be useful. And this is why it feels a little bit like it is kind of closer to BDO, where you can play BDO perfectly for free. You're just going to progress a little bit slower. I wouldn't say it's as pay to win as a game like Lost Ark is, in that kind of vein, where you can literally just spend $10,000, radically advance your character and get way ahead of everyone and get very strong. But there is a limit to how much you can spend and how much you can get, and most of it's with these kind of smaller purchases. So I'd say it's much more friendly in that standpoint. But if you want to spend money and even spend a small amount of money, you can certainly do that and get a decent amount of progression and bonus and benefit, kind of like the seasonal passes in Black Desert Online. The dungeon design is nothing completely new, so let's split it up into the gameplay experience of the dungeon and then also into the layering of the dungeon. So you'll fight bosses, you'll clear ads, you'll do mechanics. It feels just like any other dungeon you've ever done in MMOs, and boss mechanics that go along with that. However, the basic small form dungeon setup is 1 tank, 4 DPS, and 1 support character. However, keep in mind that anyone, including the tank or the DPS, could be running support for heals. Anyone, including the DPS and the healer, could be running with the smokescreen effect. Tank, they can even run with a greatsword or a sword and board and taunt for off tanking. So because there's so much flexibility in the character creation and the build creation, I think there's going to be a lot of flexibility in how people create groups and how they put them together, and maybe a meta will eventually go on. I think this block mechanic is a nice added change to the game. You can see the purple ring going in the QuickTime event. Having that as part of the core game is a nice added benefit there. And I think overall the dungeons make for a very nice instance experience. However, there are layered dungeons in this, in that they have 1 to 6 floors. As you go deeper, the enemies get harder and harder, but at certain times of the day, these dungeons become PvP areas, which is what the next part of this video is probably worth talking about, is the PvP and the opportunity for PvP PvP in Throne and Liberty. So you can actually find situations where you get raided from behind. There's going to be these instance dungeons like the one you see on screen where it's just a group. You matchmake for this, you go inside. It's very straightforward. But there's also open area dungeons that you'll just dive into. It's like an area on the map, and you'll just delve into the dungeon, and enemies can come behind you. They can kill you. They can take the loot from you if they kill the boss from you. And that kind of PvP area creates some very nice intrigue. There's also going to be some siege events, which I haven't tried yet in the open beta, where you can actually trigger a PvP event, follow that PvP event, and then spawn a siege golem. So it's kind of like a payload kind of game mode. The golem will spawn and attack an occupied territory from a guild, and you'll be able to ride the golem in and then exchange blows with PvP. So it feels like they're almost trying to recreate some of the RVR that we had like in Daok or some of the old days of Guild Wars in this kind of setup. And it's going to alternate between PvE and PvP in some areas, and how you get involved with that is big. But we know that PvP and PvE are a big separation for a lot of players. There could be cases where you get PvP when you don't want it. There could be cases where there's not enough participation in PvP because it's optional, or it's flag-based, or it's choice-based. So I think we'll have to wait and see how this develops through the open beta and the early access coming in September. Overall, the game has greatly improved since its early closed tests, and my first impressions are actually quite positive on the game overall. The early closed tests were pretty abysmal. They were very disappointing and discouraging, and a lot of the combat was very stiff and flat. Anything that you did auto attack wise, whether it be melee or ranged, you couldn't move while you were attacking, and so you had to constantly plant your feet. They only force that now with spell casts or channeled abilities, which means you can move around, and if you're attacking with a ranged weapon, you'll just constantly be shooting crossbows, stabs, longbows, the wand as well. All of those are constantly attacking, and melee have plenty of ways to get into the fight and get out of the fight as well. The quality presentation is good. The cinematics are high quality as well. And I would say that as far as like an early entry point to the MMO, it's in a good spot. It's actually really, really good. The next question is going to be, once we get to level 40 and beyond, level 50 and beyond, we start testing the end game content and doing the PvP. Does it have the lasting power? And that's where I would want to put in a couple hundred hours into the game just to see what the end game is like for the game and if it's worth your time towards the end. But the takeaway from this is just going to be first impressions, very good. I think the game's in a good spot. They've done a lot of work to polish the game. The experience is great. It looks great. It sounds great. And the overall combat has improved dramatically from their early showing. And so if you want to check it out, it's free right now on Steam and on console. You can try the open beta. The early access is starting in September with a launch fully on September 17th as well. So check it out. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people. And don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.